I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Okay, we're going to have a great episode today. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I am Dr. Jordan Robertson, and we're taking a little bit of a sidestep to talk about something that you might not think at first glance. It feels very medical or very health related. I'm joined today by one of my friends, my photographer, Laura Benn. We're going to talk about photography. We're going to talk about getting your picture taken. And I promise that this circles back to your health, your self-image, how you feel about yourself. I promise that this is going to kind of enlighten you to think a little bit differently about the way you see yourself. And we're hopefully going to leave you feeling a bit more inspired to get in front of the camera. Thanks so much for doing this with me, Laura. This is going to be fun.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. This is a topic that I feel like I kind of can go on and on and on about. So I'm really excited to dig into it today with you and yeah, just hopefully help people feel more excited about photography and having their photo taken as it relates to their business and also just their personal lives.
Yeah, we got riffing on this topic like almost a year ago, which when we jumped on this call together, we were like, how did that year go by so quickly?
Yeah.
Um, we got talking about this in my last photo shoot, which was the second one that you had ever done for me. And one of the things I love about getting professional photos done is how magical that time can be with your photographer and how much conversation comes up about who you are, what you represent, what's important to you, and how important it is for your photographer to make you feel confident and comfortable and beautiful and all the things that we, desire from a photo shoot. But you and I got talking about this, that like women's comfort getting in front of even just somebody's iPhone is something that we wanted to call out because when we're older and we look back, we want to be able to look back on these beautiful memories. And yet there's still so many women that fear having their picture taken or are concerned about it. So I would love to hear it from your perspective. Where do you think that all stems from around like, why are we so nervous about having our picture taken in the first place?
That is it's such a big question, isn't it? Because as much as I think we would love to feel like, oh, we can pinpoint this one exact cause, so let's just, deal with that and then poof, like all of a sudden all this confidence will come, streaming into us for the next time we have to show up on camera. I think it's actually a really big, complex, sort of tangled mess of an answer. I think a lot of it, unfortunately, I think comes from society in a lot of ways. We're constantly fed this stream of sort of impossible images via, back in the day, it used to be, just like magazines. Now it's anywhere you look on a phone almost, any website, social media, all these different channels coming at us. We're wrestling with impossible beauty standards, which, for myself at least now, like, in my mid 30s, we've seen beauty standards fluctuate in really huge, dramatic ways every few years. And that also is something that historically has always been happening. And I suspect will continue to happen, until far, far, far down the road, unfortunately. And I think we also have this, as women specifically, we sort of carry these expectations around, whether they're self-imposed or from external influences, about what we're quote unquote supposed to be, supposed to look like, and how we're supposed to show up. And those expectations can come from either messages we've absorbed through, mainstream media or messages we've sort of absorbed through perhaps personal relationships, be that family, be that friends, be that not necessarily in a malicious way, but just in a way where it's, you kind of take on board all this stuff just as a human being going throughout the world. And yeah, it just becomes it just becomes this thing where instead of coming to a photo shoot for your business, your brand, for your personal life, whatever, instead of coming and showing up as like, oh, wow, what a fun kind of thing we get to do. Instead, what often happens, and I include myself in this when I have my photo taken, as much as I rally and rail against it, we kind of just become bogged down with all of this pressure and all of this nervousness and all of this imposter syndrome all of a sudden. And it's such a shame because I think having your photo taken when it's done well, in the sense of layering in a lot of fun and enjoyment and pleasure into it, it can be such a celebration of self and it can be such an artistic expression and it can be such an avenue for creativity and connection. But unfortunately, when the confidence piece wobbles, we kind of lose that opportunity. So as I say, like I'm so excited to dig into this properly with you today because I think if we can unlock that confidence piece when it comes to showing up on camera, all of those other good things you have just immediate access to, which is wonderful.
And like honestly, probably better photos, right? Like I think if we're like, dragging our fingernails across the hardwood floor into a family photo, like unfortunately that photo is not going to turn out so hot, right? Whereas if
Absolutely.
we like confidently walk into this opportunity to, be showcased, like that's such a different vibe. So even if we can just untangle that a little bit, the pictures that you are taking probably get better. Um, it's funny, as you were talking about this, I was thinking about so many things that I want to unpack here. Like even just thinking generationally, right? I can deeply remember from a very young age the women in my family, as soon as that camera would come out, they would like put their hands over their eyes, right? Like no, 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 like
Yeah.
I'm not going to be in it. Let me take it. Let me take the picture. I don't want to be in the picture. And funnily, like reflecting on that now, like we can take millions of pictures that are bad shots because they're being done on our phones. And you just delete them. But back then, like that was a big deal. Like, don't put your hands in front of the camera. Like, you got to take that thing to the photography center that has to be developed in a black room for us to get that back. Like, those are major missed opportunities. But I remember like my grandma, right? I remember my grandma and my aunts and people being like, no, 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 like, don't get me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I went through those experiences as well. And that's what I mean when I say like maybe we've internalized somewhere along the way by people we have immediate access to and who we like interact with. And it's not necessary to say anything that they did in that reaction was wrong because they were also conditioned by whatever elements were in play during, that moment in their life and in that time. And but you're right, it does change how an image translates depending on kind of the energy you show up with. And that's not to say being confident on camera means you can't be nervous. You can absolutely be nervous, right? That's totally fine. It's more so showing up with the mentality of, oh, I deserve to be here. What a fun creative outlet this is. This is an opportunity to play in a lot of ways. There's so much seriousness sort of pegged onto having your photo taken these days. And it's funny as well because it's not even if you're coming in to have a big formal professional brand shoot, let's say, even when people are shooting on their phones, and there's so much magic you can create on a phone these days, which is awesome. But it's never just the first shot that's fired. And then it's like, oh, that's what goes. It's still choreographed, right? And there is still sometimes a pressure piece in play because I don't know if it's a little bit of perfectionism creeping in. I don't know if it's a bit of just self-doubt creeping in, but we over fuss with an image. And sometimes when you do that, the results are stiff. The results are a little bit cold. The results are not as magical as they could be if you just sort of really let yourself melt into the moment, play around, move, jump around, make silly faces, which I know when you say make a silly face, everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, but no, I couldn't." Because oftentimes it's as the photographer, it's not the silly face moment you're looking for, it's the split second of a reaction after, which is the big laugh, which is the moment of like, "Oh, that person's actually at ease." And we put a lot of pressure on a photograph to kind of say, like, we think it has to say everything about us in that one image, but a photo is a split second, sometimes shorter than a split second. It can't possibly say everything about you. It's about saying all these different things about you in different frames. And the only way to sort of capture that is to let yourself take a big breath and tell yourself that, okay, this is not the be all and end all. This is just a moment in time of my life, of my business, of my memory in the making, and then see what happens. Because when you can approach it like that, the results are a little more loose and a little more real and honestly more human, I find.
Makes me think of like this just like never ending chase of some sort of new beauty standard. And as you were talking about that, I'm like, make me think of like, are we supposed to have eyebrows now? Now it feels like we're really supposed to have eyebrows. Like everything is about eyebrows. But, when I was a teenager, you basically plucked out all your eyebrows, right? And so I think, when I'm attracted to photography myself, like like as a observer, I am more attracted to the uniqueness, the rawness, the things about that person that make them defy all of that cookie cutter sort of beauty standard. That's how I want to absorb photography. But weirdly, when you're on the other side and you're like creating the image, there is still that mental pull of like, well, like what's hot right now? Like, am I supposed to like part my hair in the middle or on the side?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like there's this internal narrative that gets going, right? Of oh my gosh, am I doing this right? And the answer at the end of the day is there is no right, when you're having your picture taken because you're such a unique being. And I do think this is something people sort of lose touch with because there's this bombardment of, oh, as you're saying, like, what's the parting that's cool now? Like, are pierced ears okay now? Like, what are we doing with our eyebrows? All that stuff you just said. And when we get caught up in that, you're almost boxing yourself in instead of being like, you know what? I really love messy hair. I never brushed my hair like a day in my life. So let's show up like that and put on something like an amazing, outfit that we really love. Play with juxtaposition, play with those two things, not necessarily like quote unquote lining up perfectly, because the imperfection is where the feeling is. And if you get feeling through a photograph, that's instantly going to connect more with people seeing it versus, oh, wow, it looks like the same as everything else that we've seen. And there is a lot of that at the moment, specifically when it comes to marketing and branding, where people are kind of falling into these trends and thinking, oh, this is the way now that this kind of photo is taken. And the reality is, you can bring all your creativity to a shoot and do something completely different. And that will just create more feeling, which is an emotional touch point, which gets people interested, which there's just such a positive ripple effect. But it all starts with trusting yourself to be like, okay, I really don't care what my hair is looking like today, or I really don't care if my eyebrows aren't perfectly tweezed or plucked or whatever people do with them nowadays, right? It's about showing up as yourself and playing and seeing where that takes you. And working with a photographer who understands that as well, right? There's always different approaches to the person who's behind the camera taking the image. Make sure you work with somebody who can really understand what you're looking to get out of the image versus it being like a technically sound image versus an image that's full of life versus an image that's vibrant versus one that's neutral. You really need to work collaboratively. What is that word? Collaboratively. There we go. Thanks. With your photographer to make sure that the results you get at the end of your session are ones that you're feeling excited about.
And how do we create that level of confidence for women? I think that's a really big question. Like I have some thoughts about it. And one of those pieces that I just shared there, it's like it's funny, we'll have a different like a double standard where I would love to see a picture of a woman like super happy in her jammies, right?
Yeah.
But if she was like looked so warm and so happy and so vibrant, I would love that photo. And then if people were like, okay, Jordan, like get your jammies on, like it's time for us to take your picture, I'd be like, oh no. We don't take pictures like in my jammies. Um, so we almost have this double standard where maybe, and if we can even imagine times where we've looked at some of those very like unique and beautiful cover models, right? Where there's something about the way they look that's like so just unique and beautiful. But then we can't see that same unique beauty in ourselves, right? We're like, yeah, but I never had braces and like my eyebrows are not really even and like, right? Like we do that to ourselves. And yet those very same features probably are existing in another person and we celebrate them, but we can't celebrate them in ourselves. Like how do we bridge that gap? Whereas just us even having this conversation may be helpful, but it's so interesting. I always find that how like so interesting when there's such a double standard.
There really is, and it is an interesting point as well. And it kind of goes back to that thing, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, which is we're always so much kinder to other people than we are to ourselves. We are our own worst critics, which is such a cliche to say, but it's true. It's just so unavoidably true, unfortunately. And it's, we almost, specifically when it comes to, imagery and visuals and photography, we do tend to look at other people as if they are doing it again, quote unquote, right. And it's like, oh, that's how it's supposed to be, but I can't be that. Instead of realizing that how that other person is showing up, they are doing it in ways that celebrates their uniqueness and their whimsy and their quirks and all that sort of thing. But because it comes together so beautifully, we see that as, oh, that's the way it's supposed to be. Instead of, I think there's this thing with photography where it's like, because there's all this conversation online about, authenticity and showing up raw and all that kind of stuff, which is so beautiful and so valuable in its own way. We've almost, in a way, forgotten that photography is an artistic expression and it's an artistic expression of self. The only way to really get a photograph that is 100% raw in the sense of like that authenticity context is to have your photo taken without necessarily being aware that you're having your photo taken, right? Because the moment a camera's on you, we all change and we can't help it because we're aware we're being watched, right? And I know a lot of us we like to make fun of those little plaques that say like dance like nobody's watching and stuff, but like actually they're very true, right? And it's very like there's something in there. You see it and you're like, ugh, gross, and then you're like, oh, but actually like the way you do dance around in your living room, with your dog blasting whatever is different than when you're, at a wedding and all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, there's the wedding photographer and I should maybe just like bop a little gentler, like it is different. And I think we bring that to our photography and our sense of photography as well in terms of what it should be. So I really do think if we can just kind of tap back into photography being like an artistic expression of self, that is really beautiful. And that's where we can then allow ourselves some freedom to experiment and to show up in ways that, again, aren't necessarily quote unquote 100% true to you, because how you have your photo taken is not necessarily how you hang out on your couch, right? There's little tweaks and little, enhancements in terms of lighting or styling or things like that that can happen. But is that art? Is that artistic expression true to you? And even that just like subtle change can really help how you show up because all of a sudden it's not necessarily, oh my gosh, here it is me completely exposed and vulnerable. It's you through an artistic lens, but you're controlling that artistic image. And it's not to say that that's inauthentic because it's not. It's you embodying a version of yourself. Because again, a photograph cannot show all 360 degrees of you in terms of like your emotional self, your spiritual self, your, physical self, all those things. It has to be sort of like a slice of life in that moment. So I think, yeah, I just think there's something to be said for bringing back some artistry into photography and realizing that it's okay to express yourself in different ways. And I think sometimes that can help build the confidence piece.
Yeah, those are great ideas. I would say when I'm having my picture taken now, like one of the things that's helped me is to try and um just have more intention around like what I'm thinking about or the emotion that I'm trying to create in the picture. And I'm not thinking about this when I'm like I don't know why I'm talking about my jammies so much. I feel like it's because it's raining.
It's a raining day and like we
Used to
all
be
just want to
my
be in our
jammies,
pajamas.
but like it's not the same as the picture of like me opening a present on Christmas morning and I think you're gonna do a quick shot, right? Like that's a little different than that sort of like branding photography. And I think we can talk about both of those. But um, thinking about the words or the feelings or the things that I'm trying to convey in that moment. Um, but also the like the humor and the fun and all the things that like have you light up and have that face that we love of ourselves where we're being our most true self, right? And I was
Yeah.
thinking about I was trying to figure out whether or not to share this story because there's a little bit of swearing in it, but when we did photography last time, with my husband and I did some like joint photography, which we've never done. Like since our wedding, we've never had photos taken together. And Laura, when you came and did that photo shoot for us, we like had such an amazing product from it where we were having fun, where it's very like every single picture is amazing. But
Oh, thank
we
you. Well, you
when
guys rocked
I
it completely.
what's that?
I said thank you, but you guys rocked it completely.
So what got me in that like laughing mood, and I was really like, I had the giggles like during the whole thing. And it's because I was trying to like think about that feeling of what it feels like to have to like do life with Sean, like work with Sean, because that was what we were taking these pictures for. And I told the story in my head of my son, and then I don't even know if I can tell the story without laughing, where Sean and I are in
I'm
the
already
front
laughing.
seat. You do remember this, right?
I
Sean
remember.
front seat, and we're trying to like have this like parent conversation while our kids are in the back seat. And my husband made a reference to someone that we were having a hard time with, and he called him a DB in the front seat. And he's like, he's being such a DB, which of course he meant douchebag. And I apologize if you find that term offensive, but I promise the story is funny. And so that's what he was trying to say to me. And my son, who's in the back seat, he's like, I know what that means. It means dick bitch. And the two of us are like, oh my God, like this is our life, right? Like this is where we're trying to be good parents. We're trying to be good citizens. Our son thinks we're calling someone a dick bitch. But, and I promise this story has a point. This is what I brought to the photo shoot was like, this is me doing life with Sean is humor. It's like we don't, this is what I brought to the photo shoot. And the smiles when on me are showing that experience of how our whole life is humor and fun and trying to see the like adventure in everything that we're doing, which we brought to the photo shoot. And so that's really helped me to think
Yeah.
about the like, what am I trying to convey? That this like fun, approachable, warm situation. I'm not thinking about like, oh, is like my double chin showing in this photo? I don't know.
Yeah, and no, and it's like, and that is such a great, first of all, it's such a great memory. I mean, there was so much laughter. It's surprising we got anything done, honestly. We were all just like dying of
What are you
laughter
thinking
throughout
about?
the
I'm
whole
like, do
thing.
you remember that DB story?
And then, of course, because I'm nosy, I was like, what's the DB story? So you had to tell me. But and it is so important to bring like a sense of story to whatever you're shooting. And that's something I do try really hard to work with clients on, regardless of the type of shoot we're doing. It is a lot of, sometimes it is something like where it's drawing from like a personal memory. So for instance, if I'm shooting couples and it's sort of like they want like a romantic feeling, there's certain prompts I can sort of suggest where I'll ask one of the partners to be like, oh, just whisper something you've never ever said to them in their ear. And then I just sort of like paparazzi them. And sometimes it's something so sweet and then like, we get like a beautiful little like teary moment. Sometimes it's something so absurd that they're just again sort of like dying with laughter in front of me. But either way, it's a really genuine moment, regardless of the fact that I'm there sort of watching it and documenting it. And something you can kind of do if you're showing up for, say, a branding session, and something I do with quite a few people as well, is I sort of create little stories. So if they're not feeling comfortable to tap into something from their real life, let's say we're shooting, it's a power suit, it's like gorgeous all red, and we're just in like a simple white studio, something like that. I'll go a little outrageous and be like, okay, we are hailing a taxi and we're looking over our shoulder and we're doing, and it's so silly and it's so ridiculous. And it's not a question of following that exact blocking in terms of hold your head here, put your hand here. It's just a sense of getting them to move in a way where they're not just, oh, I'm standing here. I don't know what to do with my hands. I'm in a suit. What is this? This is weird. And just sort of getting them into like, okay, you are Meryl Streep from The Devil Wears Prada and you're doing this and you're flinging your coat and blah, blah, blah. And it just sort of disconnects a little bit so that they can connect with that feeling. And then my job is to get those split seconds of realness that are happening versus as I say, the go back to, oh my gosh, I'm just going to stand here stiff as a board and hope for the best. So yeah, bringing in emotion, I think, bringing in laughter, it doesn't always have to be those big, happy emotions either. It can be tapping into something wistful. It can be tapping into something a little more serious if that's the vibe that you're wanting from your final collection. But infuse it with something real, even though you're making art, and it will still feel compelling.
I think one of my like least favorite photo shoots was I had decided to wear this blouse, and I didn't realize until I got to the photo shoot when I put it on that I couldn't actually flex my arms in the shirt because
Oh
my
no.
it was did not fit, right? I had done like way too much training, and my my biceps no longer fit in this blouse, which I didn't know until I got there. And then they wanted me to pose like with my hands, like in a particular way, except it was so tight in my blouse and like cutting off the circulation in my arms. And I'm like stiff as a board. And it was one of those like, turn your head, no, like this, no, like, no, like that, no, wait, back, no, forward, no. And then, and that was like my least comfortable photo shoot ever, which now that picture is around. It was on the cover of a magazine, actually. And so it's around. I like see it in people's offices, and I'm always like, oh God, that photo of me and my like, numb biceps. But has made me think. I've thought about that often. That like that experience of having that picture taken was so contrived, right? It was like everything about it.
Yeah.
This blouse because it matched the color scheme, even though it didn't fit. I was like put into this, kind of position because it was the best shot in their opinion. And yet I look literally like a cardboard cutout on the front of this magazine, contrasted to other, opportunities I've had my picture taken where it felt so much more fun and felt so much more real.
Yeah, and I'm sorry too because I mean, being on a magazine cover is so exciting and like that's such a huge moment and it's unfortunate when you look at it you see sort of a different experience than what it's supposed to be for you, right? So I'm sorry about that you had to go through that. But yeah, that's such a great example of how sometimes in a photo shoot we're so hyper focused on the micro, like those things like, oh, is your head here and your hand here and your body here and you twist that and you look up and there's too many, you forget that you're actually photographing a person. And I think it's so important to remember that as the photographer, especially, you are photographing a person and people don't sit superposed and rigid. People move, people react, people, you know, don't always have perfect posture and perfect this and that. Perfect shouldn't be actually, I don't think anyway, in the vernacular of talking about photo shoots at all. I think it does everyone a disservice because again, it makes it this sort of static, cold thing when it should be so full of life and it should be so beautiful as a memory to look back on. I think it's really important to enjoy your photo shoots, um, in the sense that, first of all, there is investment attached to it, of course, if you're doing it with a professional. But even if you're just snapping photos with a friend, say, like on a phone, if it's not fun, you're never going to enjoy it. And you're never going to be able to build up that confidence piece necessarily because it will always feel awful. And I think if you is feeling super uncomfortable and super unfun, I know that's not a word, but unfun, then really evaluate that situation. See, like, what is it that's not feeling great, right? Like, are you working with someone who can really make you laugh? Are you feeling excited about the clothes that you're wearing? Are you loving the setting? Are you being directed too much? Are you not being directed enough? Because there's all sorts of things you can sort of tweak to make sure that it's more enjoyable for you. And it's like anything, the more enjoyable something is, the more you want to do it. Right. The clothing piece that you were bringing up is actually really interesting too, because first of all, definitely try on all your clothes before your shoot, just to make sure. And we've all fallen into that where it's like, oh, it'll be fine. And then the wrong size ships or something happens. Like you're not alone in that. That totally happens. But I think as well, even, and especially in the context of photography, again, we all of a sudden put such a hyper pressure on clothing. Like, oh my gosh, is this the right thing to wear? Like, it has to be perfect. Is this designer enough? Is it too designer? Blah, 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 blah. And again, look at look at fashion as a tool, right? There's a great piece. Have you seen Zendaya recently? She's just covered two Vogues. So she's on American Vogue and British Vogue, and she's just released like the latest shoot and the behind the scenes. Anyway, she's stunning. She's an incredible model. That's such a skill. Incredible. But it was interesting because on I think it's LaineyGossip.com, she was writing about this, like the two Zendayas. I think that's the title of the article. And she was saying in that how Zendaya really uses fashion almost like a barrier, but not in a stay away from me way, in a way to really define herself as a public facing figure. Because the fashion then becomes a tool. So it's not about, oh my gosh, is this pant fitting perfectly? And I'm sure it is because she has a whole team of stylists. Obviously, they're not going to let her go out with stuff that's not fitting perfectly. But the clothing all of a sudden becomes part of the story versus it being, oh, this is part of me, if that makes sense. So it's not necessarily about, I need to look perfect in this clothing, but it's more about, wow, this clothing is such sort of a work of art in and of itself. Michelle Obama said something similar when she did like her book tour. There's that great, I forget who was interviewing her, but she showed up on stage with those gorgeous thigh high, like glittery gold boots. And it's like all anyone could talk about. And she was saying something along the lines of um, using fashion to sort of highlight other elements of herself. So it kind of became like almost like a cape. Like it's just like a comfort item that you can kind of wear out when you have to be public facing, which if you're having your photo taken for a business, you're being public facing. So it's just like a comfort security thing to feel more confident in how you show up. Does that make any sense? I feel like it's a
It
weird little
does because I
ramble.
no, like so when you're talking about that, it makes me think of like how we quite often when we're thinking about clothing, it's like what's gonna hide my
Yes,
like fill in
exactly.
the blank, right? Like, is this blazer gonna hide my little skin roll here when I sit down for these photos versus like,
Yeah.
are these gold buttons like absolutely boss and they're gonna like reflect in the photo in a way that brings that like richness that I'm looking for or the professionalism I'm
Yes.
looking for. So it's a very different way of like turning the clothing on its head to be about like not how does it cover up your imperfections, but how is it actually highlighting the mood and all the things that you're trying to bring to that photo shoot. I love the clothing is like my favorite part. So I feel like the clothing, if the clothing's not your favorite part, then you need to get some support with that because that's literally
Yeah.
my favorite part about getting my picture taken is the clothes.
Well,
But
because
I
it's
do
just an
think there's
opportunity
that
to dress
shift.
up. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to speak over
No,
you.
I was gonna say it's about that shift of like, and I think I've had to do that mindset shift too, where it's like, which of these is the most slimming? Like rather than that, it's like which of these is the most powerful, right? To show up
Yes.
that way. And that the photo can still be fun, right? It's not about like showing up as like a, you know, girl boss, but it's about how's the clothing become part of the imagery versus, which of these clothes is going to hide the things I don't want people to see about me.
Yeah, and that's such an important mindset shift too, because if you go into it thinking of your clothing as like, oh, which of these pieces is going to hide whatever about me, again, you're going in with sort of a restrictive mindset versus an expressive mindset, right? And if you go in more like, oh, which of these outfits is going to help me feel like I'm really flourishing and thriving and powerful and creative and just here to express myself, you connect differently to the clothes, right? And we've all been there, regardless of if you're having your picture taken or not. I fall into this a lot where if I have to have, let's say, a new dress for a function, if I go searching for it, like, you never really find the one that you want. You kind of just settle and make do because time is of the essence, right? Whereas when you're out and about and you just sort of see something on a mannequin, you're like, oh, I'll try that on. And it's like, you get that like that the excitement when you find a piece of clothing and you're like, oh my gosh, I just love it. And if you can have that sort of reaction to the clothing you bring to set or on a shoot of like, oh my gosh, I just love it. And don't worry about if you're repeating outfits or anything like that. It honestly doesn't matter. Like, again, if you're trying to show up in a way that is true to you, chances are you're not wearing a brand new outfit every single week, right? Like, clothes are fun, but we do
Speak
sort
for
of
yourself. No, I'm
repeat.
just
Yeah.
kidding.
Oh, really? Wow. But yeah,
Kidding.
like
You don't have the same outfit every week.
and then it's really becomes a question of like, how do you restyle a piece of clothing, you know? And we all have those elements in our wardrobe where it's like, oh, like this is the jean jacket I've worn, for decades and I'm obsessed with it. I still love it to this day. That can make an appearance. It doesn't always have to be, people sometimes think with photography that fashion has to be high end or nothing. It doesn't. It just has to be stuff that you really love and that you're excited about. And again, are not necessarily looking at it as just another way of feeling like you're sort of buttoned down and really restricted by because, oh, I can only wear black because it's the most slimming color. Honestly, most of the people I photograph who show up and only wear black because of that sort of they think it's the most slimming, usually afterwards they'll be like, "Oh, I really wish I'd like been a bit braver and worn more color." And it's interesting because they're like, "Oh, I never wear all black. So why did I feel?" And again, it goes back to that expectation thing where somehow we have it in our brains that we were told once upon a time that's the only thing you wear if you're showing up for yourself. But be vibrant. And that can look so different for you than it will for your best friend, than your colleague, whatever. And I think, again, it's just an opportunity to create something signature. And signature is so much more fun. It's so much more fun than doing the cookie cutter route and playing by the quote unquote rules we think we're supposed to.
So interesting. Like, as I'm thinking about the themes that we've been talking about kind of all along, right? It's like, you know, we tell ourselves lots of stories that prevent us from getting in front of the camera. When we get in front of the camera, our expectations of ourselves are different than they are of others. We also are putting a lot of pressure on these moments, and probably because we don't do it often enough, right? Like,
Yeah.
kind of like when you do the like one trip as a family every 2 years, like someone is gonna throw up, right? Like if you put that much pressure on that 5 days and it's like all your vacation fund and all your vacation time and everything is squeezed onto one day, you invariably walk away a little disappointed, right? There's no way that that vacation will meet that your expectations and hit it out of the park because we've put all of our emotional bank account on that one experience. And if you are only ever stepping in front of the camera once every 10 years to update your headshots, like that day is going to be stressful because like think about how many places that headshot needs to go in the next 10 years before you're willing to do it again. And so but funnily, like pulling from the beginning of the conversation, if we just did it more often, then we probably would be more comfortable with it, but be more satisfied with the results because it would feel like we are capturing ourselves just today rather than like this picture better work out because this is going on my LinkedIn for the next 4 years.
Yeah, no, you're so right. It doesn't have to be the be all and end all. It can just be like part of a process, right? And I do think you learn a lot about yourself too when you have your photo taken. I think,
I was
I
just
don't
gonna
want to
ask
say, yeah, great minds think alike. Yeah, but I really do think you do learn a lot about yourself because um, I always learn a lot about the people who I'm working with in photographing, mostly because I'm a chatterbox. So when I run sessions, like we're just chattering the whole time, even while we're shooting. But it is so interesting because people do leave sessions often being like, oh, I thought it was going to feel like this, but it's actually felt so completely different, usually in a very positive way, which I'm so grateful to hear. And it's just like, for instance, even with myself. So I am currently this year, one of my goals this year for myself was to do a series of self-portraits. So I'm doing one a month, basically just because I work behind the camera so often, I'm not in front of it enough. And to your point of how does it feel when you're in front of the camera and you should kind of do it more often, I'm trying to do that a little more so I can just connect a little bit more with like what the client experience is like, etc. Also, I think it'd be weirdly good for me. So and it's interesting because as I've been doing this self-portrait series, and it's just me alone in a studio with my camera, it is sort of an emotional roller coaster. You learn a lot about like, oh yeah, you're feeling, how do you calm your nerves? And like, how do you like to move? And what doesn't feel good? And what does feel good? And you experiment with your styling and you experiment with your expressions and you experiment with how you're showing up and how you're taking space. And I do think when you have your photo taken with somebody else also, you learn a lot about it feels okay to take up space and you're allowed to, and you can give yourself that permission. It doesn't have to come from anybody else, which is such, I think anyway, such an empowering thing to realize because again, we're sort of told, specifically as women, unfortunately, you kind of have to stay in this box. Like this is the way you should do it. This is how you have to do it this way or no way at all. And the more you show up on camera, the more you realize it's just like kind of like painting. It's like I can use any color I want. I can use all these different techniques. I can try this, I can try that. And it's very freeing to realize that it doesn't have to be, this one shoot cemented in time forever. You can kind of just keep going with it and keep growing because we're constantly changing, right? What you love as a style one year, you're not going to love the next. So why freeze yourself in a photograph with just that one style or just that one representation of yourself?
I love that. And what I was going to ask you, and I think you captured it beautifully, was like, so what if we've had a bad photo shoot? Like, what should we take away from it? What should we learn from it? How do we move forward from it? When I think about like all of the, photo moments I've had or opportunities I've had to have my picture taken, um, usually the things that I'm pulling away from it are generally pretty positive, but that's, I'm very much of that like learning mindset. I'm like, oh shit, we didn't get enough good pictures that session. Like, why was that, Jordan? Like, you didn't take enough outfits with you. There were too many laughing pictures, right? Which of course my tech team's always like, Jordan, like too many laughing pictures.
Yeah.
Where there were parts of myself that didn't show up properly because I didn't capture all the facets of emotion that I wanted, right? Where, you need at least one good resting bitch face photo in a photo shoot, right? Because there is that thing that sword that you're willing to die on, that face represents. So we need that photo, right? It shouldn't all be the like plastered happy face all the time. But I always walk away with it for something positive, but I'm sure you have something more to say around like how do you recover from a bad photo shoot? How do you get some confidence back that the next one can be better? Or do we just chalk this up as a learning experience, research and development, move forward, try again? Like, what would your advice be on that?
So, and it's such an important question to ask as well, because a really terrible photo shoot can be quite scarring, right? It's a very intimate thing having your photo taken. And if it's not a great experience for whatever that reason may be, that is going to sort of have a bit of a ripple effect in you. So, my first piece of advice for this is I would ask if someone came to me and was like, "Oh, I had a terrible shoot. I didn't love it." Hopefully it wasn't with me, first of all. But if they were having this experience, my first question would be like, "Okay, how much prep did you go in before you went to the photo shoot?" Because I do think preparation is where a lot of the magic lies. It's so important to connect with your photographer, whether you're having family photos done, pet photos done, a commercial shoot for your business. Connect with the photographer in advance. They ideally should be initiating that. They should be wanting to learn all about you. Should be very curious about your branding and your vision, what you like, what you don't like, past experiences, what you're nervous about, what you're excited about. They should really help you plan out what you're going to wear, offer location suggestions based on the vision. So I think preparation really makes a lot of difference. Also, it's an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you might have about workflow, about process, about what to expect, things you'd like to avoid, things you'd like to include, and get a sense of the person. Like when you think about other vendors that you use in your life, be it a dentist, be it a hairdresser, what are you looking for? The skill set, obviously, the final result, of course, but also that bedside manner. And I think your photographer's bedside manner really, really matters. The second thing I would ask if someone was like, "Oh, I had a really terrible photo shoot experience," would be, were you allowed to see any of the footage as it was happening? So something I do in all my sessions is I always show whoever I'm shooting with the back of the camera, because if they're saying, "Oh, I want something really elegant," and even though we've done the prep work, what they see as elegant, what I see as elegant might be two completely different definitions. So it's so important for me to show people this is how it's unfolding. Because first of all, if it's going well and they like what they see, they will relax a little more. There's a bit of building of the trust. They're like, "Oh, okay, it's not, I thought my hand was being really weird, but actually it looks like I really like how this is looking, etc." Right? Similarly, if they're not liking it, it gives your photographer an opportunity to change things. They are boots on the ground. I know we're all really infatuated with all this post-production stuff and all this AI stuff at the moment. And yeah, the tools can do incredible things for sure. But your photographer needs to be able to tweak and make adjustments on shoot day with you there physically in front of them to get to a point where when they show you the back of the camera, you are feeling excited and at ease and like, "Oh, okay, yeah, this is working, this is working." So I would say that would be my second piece of advice. And my third piece of advice would be, if for whatever reason all that stuff was happening and you still didn't have a great experience, I do think there's value in doing a little bit of internal work. And that's not to say that it's necessarily your fault or anything like that. But again, going back to what we were saying about how we're our own worst critics, I think there is something to be said for spending some time reflecting with yourself, being kind to yourself. Something I suggest to people sometimes if they're feeling very, very nervous is spend some time looking at yourself in a mirror, which sounds so like weird and narcissistic and like, wow, like why? But like just really look at yourself because we don't often spend time seeing ourselves as we are. We carry this mental picture around in our head, right? So a story, and I've shared this before, but a story that I like to use as an example for this is for many years, like I thought I looked like Anne Hathaway. That was like my little like mental picture carrying around in my brain. So whenever I would see myself in a reflection or something, I'd be like, oh my gosh, like I look terrible, quote unquote, terrible, because I didn't look like the image I was carrying around in my head. I didn't look terrible. I just didn't look like what I was expecting. So, and I think a lot of us fall into that, right? We think we look a certain way, especially too, if you're posting on social a lot and using like filters and this and that, how often are you actually looking at your true self? So really work, I think, on unpacking some kindness for yourself, celebrating what your body can do, celebrating what your face looks like, accepting what that looks like. And again, this is something I do find it can be for both men and women, of course, but I do find the majority of the men I shoot show up and I'm like, okay, and this is what it's looking like. They're like, yeah, okay, cool. And I'll be like, hey, any adjustments? And they're like, no, like that's my face. They're so okay with it. And women, typically, broadly speaking, are not. And I'm wondering if it's because we don't spend a lot of time looking at our true selves. So I think that would be somewhere to perhaps start as well. And then just try it again. Try it again with a photo shoot. And again, if investment is like a big issue, which of course understandable, and you don't want to like dive back into a big investment piece, especially if you've had a bad opportunity, look for a photographer who does like a mini session, baby toes, dip your toe back in the water, see how it is. Even just ask a friend to kind of come over, play around with the camera on their phone, take some photos, just sort of a little bit of exposure therapy to bring yourself back to a place of feeling okay before there's no reason to like run and dive off the diving board right away. So
Boudoir shoot right now. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like, oh, a bad experience. Let's go. We're gonna go right now. Like, no,
Right.
no, no.
Get in
Like
your
ease
underwear. We're
into
gonna
it. Yeah, full boudoir shoot, nothing else. Nothing else will cure it. Like, no, you have to kind of like step into it slowly. So, yeah, I think those things might be good places to
Mm.
start. The preparedness, work with someone who you feel comfortable with and who's showing you what it's unfolding like, and practicing some self-kindness, which I know sounds fluffy, but it's the older I
No,
get, the more important it is that I realize.
it is. And the only thing I would add to that is like even thinking like when I had my first couple of photo shoots done, I was really ill prepared. I really love that you talk about the preparedness part. Like I didn't know that I needed a photo with space on one side for words on social media, right? I didn't know that we needed some to be portrait, some to be landscape, for some to be, if we got my shoes in this picture, my face was too far away for it to be zoomed in on for the website. Like when you see pictures that you're like, that's amazing, right? So if you're admiring people's work and saying, that's an amazing photo, yes, they're relaxed and happy and it's a hopefully candid feeling moment, but also the preparation that went into achieving the shot, there's more to it than just, sitting down and having a photo snapped. And so what I like to suggest is that you can't just be a one and done, right? Because
Yeah.
you're invariably going to be like, shoot, I should have done that on a black background, or shoot, we should have, I shouldn't have had that stool in the picture because it's in the way of, but you only learn those things from experimenting and trying things on in your business and in your life. That for me, like it wasn't even until my last photo shoot that I was like, okay, we got to do some where I'm like a little off to the side of the pic. We need some that are these dimensions, because the more refined my ask is, the better the pictures are. But I didn't even know what I was doing. Like I had like bra straps and elastics on my wrist in my first photo shoot because I didn't even think about some of those pieces. And the more experience I get, the better I get at going, I need these 5 emotions, I need these 3 shots. But that didn't
Yeah.
come on my first shoot, right?
Yeah, and to that point, like context really matters, right? So like the context of your photo shoot, as you're saying, if you're shooting a lot for social media and you like to use, graphics with lots of text, that is something that your photographer should be asking in the preparation process because not everyone wants graphics with their images, right? Some people are just like image only. Or if you're shooting a lookbook and it's going to print, that's a completely different way of shooting than shooting, for the website exclusively, or if you're having a bit of a mismatch of everything. I think I'd like to add too that the photographer you hire really matters, because a branding photo shoot is very, very different from a lifestyle shoot. And that photographer will have experience that they're bringing into that. So for instance, the thing like, oh, you've got elastics on your wrist and stuff. Now, for myself as a photographer, that's stuff I'm constantly watching for. That shouldn't be on my client to be aware of, because I do this every day. I shoot so often, right? I should be bringing the experience to that versus somebody who's never had their photo taken in a professional capacity before. They wouldn't know. How would they? Right? So yes, being aware of that stuff yourself is great. But again, it really goes back to like who you're working with to ensure that like you have a level of support there as well, because you're not necessarily doing this every day, but they are. So I think the context of who you work with really matters as well. And yeah, ultimately where you want your photos to be most useful to you is going to inform how that whole thing unfolds. And that can relate even to family photos. If you're like, oh, we really want to do a beautiful gallery wall, how that final collection comes together is going to be very different than if they're like, oh, we just want like a series of portraits to kind of like email over to the grandparents. So yeah, context really matters. It makes a huge, huge difference. And again, the more supported you feel in your shoot too, I think, again, that confidence will kind of just come because you've got a team there to kind of like help you. They're rooting for you. They want it to come together exactly as you want it to come together.
I love that. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. We've covered like societal pressures on how people feel that they look. We've covered a
Just
lot
a
of
casual conversation on this rainy day.
yeah, we're just gonna bring like some feminism into the conversation. Yeah. Um, Laura, how can our listeners find you?
So at the moment, they can find me at my website, which is lauralbenn.com or gooseberrystudios.com. Both kind of feed into it. You can find me on Instagram at Gooseberry Studios. And I also have a newsletter called the Gooseberry Review, which is hosted over on Substack, where honestly, it's where I'm showing up most online these days and where I'm really, just digging into topics that are a little bit deeper and a little juicier than what, social platforms kind of allow for. So that is at thegooseberryreview.substack.com. So yeah, if you're interested, you can hop on over and chat with me there.
Yeah, we'll put all those links like directly in the show notes, so it's an easy click over for you. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us, Laura. Like I think um for me, that I don't particularly, I never liked having my picture taken. And my experience working with you, working like over the course of a few years on like this inevitability of having to have my picture taken all the time. I feel like I've learned a lot from it, and I feel way happier about myself and in my body and with the product, like the photos we get back. But I don't think that's an accident, right? I think that's like coming from some like intentional work, but also who I surround myself with, you included in that.
Well,
And
thank
so
you.
I am so grateful that we could kind of share this conversation, because I think it's an important one, because so many people that I work with either have a 25-year-old headshot or really nothing at all. And I think that there's so much that can come from like showing up as your true self in a really great photo, that I want more women to take that risk to have.
Definitely.
Do you want to leave us with any final words before we hop off?
Yeah, I would just say if this helps at all for anybody who's listening, I would say honestly, about 90% of the people who come through my studio doors feel nervous about having their photo taken. So like you're not alone in this, okay? And as I was saying, like when I'm shooting even my own self-portrait in studio alone, like I get nervous. Like the nerves are okay. This is not a question of like the confidence needs to wipe out all nerves and then you're ready to have your photo taken. It's not that at all. It's just about just trusting the process a little bit, trusting yourself, and just knowing that you deserve to kind of have your moment documented and have it turn out and feel the way you want it to. So don't worry if you're nervous. Nervous is okay, but yeah, some magic can happen if you just kind of be a little bit brave and then kind of see what happens and keep at it.
Amazing. Thanks for spending this rainy afternoon with me,
Oh
Laura.
my gosh, thank you. It was a delight. Honestly, I could chatter with you like all day. So thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged.
My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.